Welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Nathan and I'm a 5th year medical student at UCL. This is my 8th vlog, and joining me in this vlog today is a special guest, Nikhila. So if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Nikhila. I'm a final year medical student at the University of Birmingham, which is why we're doing this on Zoom today. We're basically filming a video about tips about acing your medical school interviews.
Right, fantastic. Yes, so this is going to be a talk about our experiences and our advice about medical school interviews. So if you are an aspiring medical student, hopefully this video will be quite useful for you. But before we start, I think it would be quite useful to differentiate between the two main types of interviews that are used, which are multiple mini interviews and panel interviews. So if you want to explain what multiple mini interviews are, Nikhila?
So multiple mini interviews, or MMIs as we call them, are basically like speed dating, when you have lots of different stations and you'll have 2 minutes before the station to read the question or the scenario, and then you go into the station and there's an interviewer present who will then ask you questions, or it might be role play, and the topics can range from ethics to work experience to basically whatever they want to ask you about. And then panel interviews, Nathan?
Yeah, so panel interviews are more of your sort of standard traditional interview type when you go for a job. It's basically normally with a panel of representatives from the medical school. Of course, this year it'll be online, but yeah, you normally have, say, half an hour or an hour worth of set questions from the interviewing panel. So yeah, it's a bit more of the classical type of interview. So before we get on to our tips and advice, I'm just going to tell you what sort of interview I had and what Nikhila had too. So I had 3 panel interviews at Cambridge, UCL and Cardiff, and 1 multiple mini interview at the University of East Anglia. And Nikhila?
So I only had 2 interviews, and both of them were MMIs, and they were at UEA in Birmingham.
Cool. So hopefully we have quite a broad range of experience to share of both types of the interview. Okay, so let's get into sort of what tips and advice we would give. So if you want to start, Nikhila.
So the first tip that I thought was keeping a logbook, and the logbook was basically any articles I've read, any topics that I found interesting, and also just situations in which you've shown teamwork or leadership, because if you need to think of those examples on the spot, it's actually really hard. So you have actually got a notebook where you've written all this down, thought about it, so it was quite good to refer to.
Another tip that I would give is to research your university that you're applying to and the medical school that you're applying to. It's good because it will give you confidence when you're answering questions about, say, why you want to go to that university or a particular university. You'll be able to sort of provide nuggets of information that show that you're passionate about that place. So that's definitely important. I would also say it's really important to research the particular interview technique that they'll be using, whether that be panel or MMI, and in terms of if it is MMI, how long you'll have for each station, and how it's changed due to COVID, sort of how they're operating their online systems. This will all mean that you're feeling comfortable when it comes to the interview, because you'll know what to expect.
So the next topic we wanted to talk about was work experience, because I know it can be difficult to get work experience now. But there's lots of virtual work experiences that popped up, and we can put the links in the description box below. And it doesn't necessarily have to be medical work experience. I mentioned my McDonald's job. It can be any volunteering that you've done in the past, or any time that you worked with people, because it just shows skills like teamwork, leadership, which is quite important being a medical student and a doctor. And also it would help if you can talk to friends or family that are medical students or doctors, because it shows that you've actually tried to find out what being a medical student and being a doctor is about. Anything you want to add to that, Nathan?
I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what work experience you have, as Nikhila was saying. It's someone could come in the door with 2 years worth of work experience and you may only have a couple of weeks. It's about how you reflected on that work experience, what you gained from that, and that's what the medical schools are looking for. So if you don't have any medically related work experience, then don't worry. Just think about how the experience that you do have is related to skills that you think are important to being a doctor. Another piece of advice that I would give is to practice. You wouldn't go into any exam without practicing many mock papers, at least I wouldn't anyway. So it's really important to practice your interview technique, to become confident in answering questions and thinking on the spot as well. But on that sort of road, I would definitely consider talking to people that you aren't familiar with. So whether you have any family, friends that are happy to interview you, and doing that online as well to prepare for an online interview as well, because that's quite a strange thing to do as well. Never mind doing an interview in the first place. So that's something that I would definitely consider doing in terms of practicing for and preparing for your interview.
And for MMIs especially, like it's really important to practice your timing because you only have 6 or 7 minutes to get your point across. And sometimes when it's like a debate station, you kind of have to do the pros and the cons and a summary. So just, practice in front of the mirror with a timer. You don't really need to do those stations with other people. And then the next thing we want to talk about was knowing your personal statement in and out. So everything you've written on there, make sure you can back it up. If you've got books or journals in there, make sure you've read them. Any work experience that you mentioned, make sure you know what you learned from the work experience. And if you have any specific scenarios, like a specific patient that you talked to or something that really stood out, like make sure you think about that before your interview. And be prepared to back up anything from that personal statement.
It does bring us on to sort of, we've talked about how you can prepare for the interview, but in terms of what to do on the interview day, do you have any advice for that, Nikhila?
So the main thing for me was about being punctual and being calm. So virtually it would mean turning your laptop on an appropriate amount of time beforehand, making sure you know exactly which website you're going to, who to contact if you're having technical difficulties. And if your microphone's working, your camera's working, and if it's in real life, then, turn up at the venue at the time or maybe like 15-20 minutes early, and then try and be calm. So make sure that you're not cramming stuff, medically related stuff 20 minutes before the interview, have a cup of tea, try and relax. I know you'll probably be stressed and nervous, but try and do things that will calm you down. Talk to people, whatever helps you.
In the interview itself, I would recommend that you be honest. If you don't know the answer, and it is particularly if it is an MMI station where there's a short amount of time, you need to get on to the next question so that you can gain points possibly in later questions. There's no point trying to make up an answer if you have no idea how to answer the question. So also don't lie. Medical schools and interviewers tend to see through lies quite easily, and it doesn't reflect well on you, especially if you want to become a doctor. Fantastic. In terms of resources that we found useful that we'd like to share with you, I certainly found a number of online resources quite useful, particularly the student room. It's if you don't know what the student room is, it's forums where you can find people who are taking sort of the same interview cycle as you for your particular university, and that can help if they have any resources. What about you, Nikhila?
Definitely. There's tons of online resources. So just type medical school interviews and you'll get loads of British, American, Canadian resources with just lots and lots of questions and scenarios you can consider. The Medic Portal is a really good website from what I remember. And then there was a book that both me and Nathan used. It was like a green book. We'll put a picture of it somewhere. And that was quite good, and that was about £20 to £25, and I think that's the only thing I bought. So the next point I'd want to say is you don't have to spend tons of money, so you don't need to go on interview courses. There's so many online resources. You can practice with your friends and family, so don't feel like you have to spend the money to, get into med school, because you can prepare for it online.
Completely agree. And as Nikhila is saying, you can prepare for it with loads of online free resources. And one really good example is YouTube. There are so many videos on YouTube of preparing for interviews, sort of tips for being in interviews, and just maybe even mock interviews from the universities themselves. So definitely do check that out. So I think that concludes our vlog. I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it useful. Thank you very much, Nikhila, for joining me for this video.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching.
Okay. So you can talk about what is so funny about this? It's really difficult to get work experience in the